today we are so happy to have as our guest Kamla Kapur, and she was born and raised in India and studied in the United States. She was a distinguished literature professor at Grossmont College, and her writings have been very extensive and have included plays, novels, poetry, essays, and reimagining Indian and Mid-Eastern spiritual writings. Her latest book is called The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life, and is published by Inner Traditions, was just released. She lives in Del Mar, California, and also spends several months a year in the remote Himalayas, where she travels to as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kamla.
I'm happy to be here, Ellen. Thanks for having me.
So you have been a writer a very long time. What made you want to do writing as your life's work?
Well, that's a very interesting question and doesn't really have an answer, but I can give you the circumstances. And the circumstances were that my father always, when we went on picnics or to trips, he would have my sister and me write about it. And I took to it like a duck to water, and my sister didn't, never did. And I don't know why I did. And once I started doing that, I was hooked. I've been writing since I was 16. And I think a lot of these questions can be answered by, of course, there's nurture, which was my father's role in my being a writer, but there's also nature. And I think that I do believe that talent can be cultivated, but a lot of it is inherent. But I wouldn't have been a writing teacher if I didn't believe that you can definitely hone your strategies, your writing skills by practice. So I would say it's a part of both. I think I was always meant to be a writer. It's where I'm happiest. It's where I breathe, actually. If I'm not writing, and I haven't been writing lately, although I am doing some editorial work on one of my books.
So that's, see, you just said the magic word, books. So this book that we're talking about today, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life, is in no way your first book. So
I don't know.
So what are some of the other titles? Do you have, of the ones you've written so far, do you have a favorite?
They're all my favorite, and I guess because, I had to write them because they engaged me very deeply. I wrote 2 books about Rumi because I'm very interested in spiritual guidance.
So I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there because you're saying Rumi, and I have studied Rumi for probably almost 70 years as well, but not all our listeners are at all familiar. So you actually tell us what your feeling is about Rumi's writings or what you wrote about him.
Well, Rumi is known as a poet across the world, and when I started reading the original text, not in the original Persian, because I don't know Persian, but I started reading Nicholson's version of the Matnavi, I was hooked onto that book because of the poetry, but much more so because I'm a storyteller, Rumi as a storyteller. So what I did was I extracted Rumi's stories from the Matnavi, which was a very frustrating process because Rumi is very long-winded, and he'll start a story and abandon it, and then he'll go on and pick up another story. And then he's like a weaver, he just weaves things in, and he'll finish the first story like 40 pages later. So, and the second Rumi book that I wrote, which is called Rumi Tales of the Spirit, Journey to Healing the Heart, has commentaries by me on the stories and I found that book has been very popular with readers because it offers guidance based on a story, which is what I like to do in all my work.
Well, let's just pick one, not go through the whole story. But so, in other words, you would present the story and then you would comment on it. And perhaps, even though you are from India, you're very much a U.S. resident for many, many years. So you have a perspective of what a person might be reading it who isn't familiar with some of these spiritual teachings. So I'm sure your explanations really elucidated that in a way people could grasp something.
Well, even though I'm from two cultures, I'm a citizen of the world. And I think that more and more as we evolve, we are all becoming citizens of the world. And that commentaries about our day-to-day lives, I brought my commentaries into modern day relevance and how it applies to our lives, how it applied to mine, and how it helped me, and how it could help the reader. That was my mission, and I think I accomplished it.
That sounds fascinating. Can you give us one example
Of?
Where you made a commentary that brought a concept from Rumi into something that would be, very understandable by a reader?
Well, one of the stories I could tell you right off the bat.
Good.
Now, remember, I'm going to be 76 soon, and my memory is failing me too. But one of my favorites that surfaced in my consciousness right now is about this little mouse who finds a camel sleeping in the desert. So the mouse is a very clever mouse, and he thinks, well, I'm going to take the leading rope of the camel and take him home, and all my relatives will be so surprised because he is full of pride and he thinks he's the greatest there is. So he starts doing that, and the camel sleepily follows him, and then they reach the bank of a river, and so the mouse stops because he doesn't know how to cross the river. He's too small. So the camel just opens his one eye and says, well, Lord and Master, take us across this river. You're so bold. You're so strong. So so he says, I can't do it. But the mouse tries to do it and almost drowns. And he kind of was panting on the shore. And so the camel says to the mouse, he says, hop up on my hump, and I will take you across. And a camel here is a symbol for a guide. We think we are so proud, and we think we are so strong, and we are so capable of negotiating our own lives. We don't easily accept that we are helpless in certain straits. And the message of the story was that we have to trust our guides because we're running blind in the world. And there are many situations in our life that we can't control, that we have no agency over. So we have to trust our guides who can see further than us and who've traversed the terrain and can guide us.
Well,
so, that's
beautiful.
One of my thesis. That's one of my favorite things to say, because I myself survived through guidance.
As like you're pointing out, everybody does, and it has to do with maybe being too proud to accept it. So what made you decide to write your latest book, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life?
I was aging. I was not very happy about it, and I negotiate all the things I'm not happy about in my life by writing about them. And so, because I wanted to discover for myself what about aging, to parse all the ganglion of complicated threads in me about aging. So I began writing it, and it helped me a lot. I also wanted to find a book about aging and about a memoir, I mean, any sort of book that really talked firsthand about the intimate details of an author's life in the process of aging as a writer. And so, so that's what this book is about. It's a memoir. It's also a love story about an aging couple, and how to negotiate love, how to allow ourselves to be guided by our guides when we are in difficult straits, how I do it, how the readers can do it. I also tell stories about myself and about, not just about myself, but other stories of interest and relevance as well.
Well, it's quite a nice book, and I do want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen live, listen online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio or absolutely any podcast venue. The other day, I looked up Herbally Yours, and I have another podcast called The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z, and I looked them both up on Amazon, and they're there. So you can listen absolutely anywhere, and we actually have hundreds of past shows available for you to listen to, as well as at least 2 new ones every week. So thank you so much for joining us right here on Herbally Yours. And today we have as our guest Kamla Kapur, and she is an author, very prolific author, and she also was a distinguished literature professor at Grossmont College. And we're talking about her latest book, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kamla.
Well, thank you. And I enjoy talking about the book, and thank you for showing an interest in it.
So let's talk about some of the things you point out in the book, like what role do you think exercise and physical activity play in healthy aging?
I think that it plays a very important role, but I'm going to say that with the caveat. I think that exercise, stretching, any form of exercise, little weightlifting is very important. But I also want to point out that too much exercise can sometimes damage you. And I am suffering the damages of it because I overdid it in February and ended up with 2 new autoimmune diseases, PMR, which is a disease of the joints and muscles. And
so wait, in what way do you think that you overdid it to bring on an autoimmune challenge?
I think I overdid it because this happened, and I'm not definitely telling you that there is a causal relationship between my overdoing it and the PMR. But I experience it now that I'm going through PMR, that the day that I overdo it, I am useless the next day. So I think it's very necessary to consult your body and to push it just a little bit, but not too much.
Well, that is interesting. And sometimes what you're doing, like I have always been physically active, and one of the exercises I do regularly is yoga. And
Yes.
Then I always tended to actually sit all the time in a cross-legged position, and since I work now, ever since COVID, I'm in front of a computer a lot of hours every day. It would be hours a day that I would sit that way. And then my meniscus actually shattered. And I really think through research that that's one of the things, you would think yoga is so good, but stretching the exterior part of the ligament that goes around my knee or anyone's knee in terms of where the meniscus is, could have had too much strain because of always sitting in a cross-legged position. So who knows? And of course, when you're 20, that's one thing. And when you're in your mid-70s, it's another thing. So I think it's coming to terms with those kinds of changes.
Yes, absolutely. And to really pay attention to the body's needs, because that has become my focus at this stage in my life. Very physically, bodily oriented. I make sure I do my yoga every morning because it makes me feel a little better for a couple of hours. And then, but very careful not to overdo it.
Now, when we talk about something like success, that's such a big driving force, especially for young people. And I think it's really a shame when they feel like they're not a success just because they haven't, let's say, made a certain amount of money that in their mind is what you need to be successful. There's many other feelings of success and accomplishment that we can have. But how has your definition of success changed as you've gotten older?
Well, earlier it was the general accepted definition of success that everybody goes by. It's money, and it's, it's a good job, it's a relationship, it's, and all of these things are very important. But to feel like a failure because you're not getting to your goal is the greatest bane of this whole success failure game. I'll tell you how my definition of success has changed. I think defeating failure is the greatest success. Defeating these feelings of failure by not only self-talk, self-affirmation, self-love, but also knowing that to persist in your definition of success is fine, but if your persistence is not yielding any fruit for you, then it's very, very important for you to examine your sense of success. Success in the West and everywhere in the world now is defined now by how much you own, how much you possess, and it is based on appearance. It's how you are perceived by others, more so than by yourself. I think that when I'm a success in my own eyes, and it's taken a lot of work for me to be successful in my own eyes, even when I'm not writing, for example, or not publishing. So this is my job now. I am self-affirming. I know I'm a success because I'm negotiating the difficulties of my life the best that I know how, because I have accepted my life as it has panned out and as it is today.
So stop there 1 minute, because you've put so much thought into this, and I just want to remind our listeners that we are talking today with Kamla Kapur, and she is the author of The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life. And in her book, she goes into what we're talking about today on the show to a much greater depth, and it's a very beautifully written and comforting book. Now, you talk about you with self-acceptance, but you have studied many spiritual paths. So in what way would you address yourself with self-talk, or even if it's nonverbal, so that you tell yourself, yeah, I'm okay, and you are successful at a particular thing, versus the negative self-talk that so many people always have going on in their head towards themselves?
Well, it is... I'll give you an example. Just a few days ago, I was was in my study, and I just got news about a friend of mine, not really a friend, but somebody I kind of had heard about, getting a successful award. And I found myself getting into self-pity. Now, I'll tell you that we do this all the time. We are not pretty enough. We are not intelligent enough. We haven't, gotten this award or that award. And all this negative self-talk just drags you down to misery. And I remember two of the techniques that I use from my guru, who is Guru Nanak, who is the founding father of Sikhism. And I live by two of his phrases. And the first one is, conquer your mind and conquer the world. And I was reminded of it. And I said, this is stupid. You can't go down this lane. It's dark and it's unhappy. Do you really want to do this? And the answer was no. So I said, okay, I've got to conquer my mind about this. And the second thing that came to my rescue, also from Guru Nanak, was the concept of hukam. Hukam is acceptance of what life gives you, how your life is, and how it has been, and how it's unfurled, your level of success or failure, or however you count that, And I've got to tell you, Ellen, that it turned my world around. I had such a wonderful day after that.
Yeah, by having that focus. So that's a very interesting thing you shared about a teaching from your guru about free your mind. And I want to share, there's almost the same teaching, but this was from a group called The Last Poets. And I don't know how many of you ever heard of The Last Poets, but they were the first rap group that I ever saw, and that must have been in the 1960s in a basement in like Trenton, New Jersey or something. And what they said was, free your mind and your ass will follow. So it's kind of the same thing, actually. So that was very, very interesting coming, both from something that would be a rap group and a very old one, too, many decades ago, and this guru. So now we know that must be a universal truth if it's coming at us from so many different pathways. So thank you so much for sharing that. So how do you keep yourself, as you see that you're aging, mentally stimulated and engaged?
Yes, it's been a little difficult lately with my autoimmune diseases, but I try on a daily basis. The only thing I know how to do to keep myself mentally awake and engaged is like I'd mentioned earlier, I'm editing a book that I'm writing on Guru Nanak right now. It's helping me to negotiate my own life and to talk about my experience now, the difficult circumstances, and how his advice helps me to overcome it. And I have so many files and folders, and so just keeping track of them. But I think that people can do very, very small things to stay engaged, other than, puzzles, etc. I think reading is a wonderful way to go. And even if, I know that I went through a phase where I didn't want to read at all. But now I read, and I only read, like, if I can't read a longer passage, I'll just read one paragraph. And and if I'd like to read really heavy texts, and right now I'm reading then I am the world that is, by this neuroscientist. And if I don't understand something, I'll go back and read it. And sometimes I'll just skip what I don't understand, and it's too heavy for my brain.
Maybe think about one of the concepts. And just by thinking about a new concept, for anyone of any age, when you're thinking about a new concept, when you're talking about neurophysiology, you're actually creating another little pathway in your brain that is physically stimulating and also causes the release of certain hormones and other cognitive support mechanisms. So, that's a very, very good idea. And I'm sure in terms of spirituality, that has been a thread through your whole life. And that's actually supportive as we get older as well.
Yes, and spirituality can come to us from all sources, neuroscience, science, it can, all subjects, all topics kind of are circumscribed within the human experience and have relevance for all of us.
Well, that's
all topics lead, I feel, to awareness, to consciousness expansion.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, and people can look up your book at Kamla Kapur. That's Kamlak and then Kapur.com, and we'll have a live link to that on the archive, Kamla, because this show will be on the archive as well. And I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again to Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. Until then, stay healthy.